Tonight, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi replied to the White House counsel's letter to Congress this afternoon, saying that Donald Trump and the Trump administration will not cooperate with the House impeachment inquiry and will not respond to any subpoenas because the inquiry is, according to the president's lawyer, quote, constitutionally invalid, even though impeachment is in the Constitution. Speaker Pelosi said tonight, this letter is manifestly wrong and is simply another unlawful attempt to hide the facts of the Trump administration's brazen efforts to pressure foreign powers to intervene in the 2020 elections. Despite the White House's stonewalling, we see a growing body of evidence that shows that President Trump abused his office and violated his oath to protect, serve, and defend the Constitution. The White House should be warned that continued efforts to hide the truth of the president's abuse of power from the American people will be regarded as further evidence of obstruction. Mr. President, you are not above the law. You will be held accountable. Here is Lindsey Graham echoing what Speaker Pelosi said tonight 20 years ago when he was a prosecutor in the impeachment trial of President Clinton.
When asked for information, Richard Nixon chose not to comply, and the Congress back in that time said, you're taking impeachment away from us. You're becoming the judge and jury. It is not your job to tell us what we need. It is your job to comply with the things we need to provide oversight over you. The day Richard Nixon failed to answer that subpoena is the day that he was subject to impeachment because he took the power from Congress over the impeachment process away from Congress, and he became the judge and jury.
Joining our discussion now, Harvard Law School professor Laurence Tribe. He is the co-author of To End a Presidency, The Power of Impeachment. And Professor Tribe, it's an 8-page letter. It's very odd. It actually cites a couple of cases, but it also includes references to the unemployment rate and what a great job Donald Trump is doing as president of the United States. There's the re-election paragraphs in that letter, and it has the air of a legal letter. But what's your reading of it?
Well, it's obviously a political document. The legal analysis is vacuous. The cases that it cites are completely irrelevant. It's citing cases from the 1950s in which witnesses before Congress who were being hounded by the likes of Joseph McCarthy were denied their rights and were convicted in violation of their rights. This is completely irrelevant. But because the letter is so obviously weak, and because the White House counsel is no fool, my assumption is that this is an attempt to distract the House of Representatives into giving up on getting more factual details and simply pursuing the obvious obstruction of Congress, which this is, following Article 3 of the Nixon Articles of Impeachment. But I think Adam Schiff is smarter than that. He's made it clear that in addition to impeaching the president for obstructing Congress and refusing to cooperate and pretending that Congress is a non-existent rather than a co-equal branch, that he's going to pursue subpoenas in court. Now, of course, courts are not as quick as we would like them to be. But at this point, I think they're going to become impatient as well. There's evidence from what the courts have said just today in one proceeding before Judge Beryl Howell, where she responded to the kinds of arguments the administration is making by saying, wow, you really are going out on a limb. That was the essence of what she said. I think courts are now going to be impatient. And so we're going to see the House of Representatives both walking and chewing gum at the same time, not just in the classic sense of legislating about social and economic policy while impeaching, but impeaching on several fronts at once. That is, they're going to hold this guy accountable for obstructing Congress, but there's no rule saying you can only impeach him once. They're also going to pursue further details of the shakedown scheme in which the president conspicuously and right on the very text of the White House readout of that infamous phone call basically says to one of our allies, we're not going to support you against Russian aggression unless you do what we want. Do me a favor, though. Help me go after Joe Biden and help me undermine the truth that Russia helped me get elected. That is going to be the core of the impeachment. The impeachment is not going to get distracted by what an awful lot of Americans don't care about, and that is process. It's going to go after the substance of how this president has betrayed his oath and used his foreign policy and military powers for his own benefit. And while doing that, with whatever information the courts help us get, the House of Representatives is also in a position to say this kind of stonewalling, as exemplified by this puerile letter, will not stand and is itself an impeachable offense.
One of the big things that the letter relies on is the precedent in previous impeachment processes where the House of Representatives, as a group, voted to basically authorize the beginning of an impeachment inquiry. That hasn't happened here. And so the White House counsel is saying that alone means this is not a real impeachment inquiry and it is not a constitutional impeachment inquiry.
Well, I think they realize that that's a ridiculous argument because the rules of the House of Representatives, which at one time did assume that there had to be a vote of the entire House to authorize the inquiry, have since been changed. That's why the letter doesn't really lean on that thin reed, but instead makes these other arguments about how the president is not being given a fair chance to defend himself in the House of Representatives. Of course, you get a chance to defend yourself in the trial, which, as I understand it, and as the Constitution says, is in the Senate. Now, if they would rather have the trial in the House of Representatives, I'm sure Nancy Pelosi would gladly oblige, but I doubt that that's what the president wants. This is an investigatory and prosecutorial step. The trial, for the president's benefit, if he hasn't read that part of the Constitution, is in the Senate. That's where I suppose he's relying on Mitch McConnell to deep six everything. But I think that as the country moves toward the recognition that we have a lawless president who is in it for his own benefit, it may well be that the Senate itself begins to rethink whether it wants to go down with this particular ship.
What will happen in court when the president's lawyers take this argument that they outlined in this letter into a courtroom?
Well, I think judges will be incredulous, and I think that's true of judges appointed by any president. Just this morning, Judge Howell was incredulous when the administration argued that the Watergate grand jury materials should not really have been turned over back in the Nixon days. And if the Justice Department then had seen it as clearly as it does now, the Nixon case would have been very different. Well, when judges hear that in the face of all that we have been through as a country, they tend to scratch their heads and react with incredulity. And I think that's what's going to happen here. This is not going to get anywhere. And I think that the courts will rebuff this attempt to put the president completely above the law. They say he can't be indicted, but now they're basically saying he can't be impeached either. And in the district court, they argued in the Southern District that he can't be investigated. Well, that's not why we fought a revolution. He's not above the law, and he will learn his lesson.
Professor Laurence Tribe, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.